Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Snake Oilers podcast. I'm Patrick Gray. The idea behind these Snake Oilers podcasts is vendors can pay us to come here and pitch their products to you, the listener, and we've got three very interesting pitches for you today. We are going to be hearing from Realm Security, which has built a data pipeline platform, which I guess is similar to Cribble, but much more focused on security. We're going to hear from Horizon3, and they do AI pen testing, at massive scale. I find this a really, really interesting idea. There's a few companies in this space, so definitely wanted to get one of them into one of these segments to talk about it. And then we're going to be chatting with Persona, and Persona do that sort of identity verification through live capture stuff, right? So they can help regulated industries verify and identify their customers to make sure they are who they say they are by doing live capture of like a government ID and then their face. But the funniest thing is happening, which is that with all of these North Korean people turning up for jobs in Western companies, this sort of technology is actually becoming quite useful for detecting that sort of stuff. And it's also a pretty effective control against various forms of social engineering, at least in some contexts. So we'll be chatting to them a little bit later, but let's get into it now with Realm Security, and we're going to be chatting with its chief executive, Pete Martin, and also their data science guy, Colin Germain, popped along in this interview as well. As I mentioned earlier, Realm is a data pipeline platform similar to Cribble, but very much tailored for security applications, right? And it's heavy on AI. They describe it as an AI native data pipeline platform. And, for those who are unfamiliar, these sort of platforms, they are like way stations for data, right? You get to decide from a log stream, which ones go over here into the seam, which ones go into an archive for later, and which ones just get, evaporated, which ones do you just let boil off, sort of thing. So Pete Martin is the first person you're going to hear from in this interview, and I just got him to start off by explaining exactly what Realm Security is. Here he is.
So Realm Security is a Boston-based cybersecurity company that offers an AI native security pipeline, which I realize could mean anything. So what I mean by that is, instead of being a bytes in, bytes out pipeline, we've built a transparent layer into all of the individual pipelines themselves, which give us the ability to gather deep statistics in an understanding of the actual composition of the log. And then we can take further activities and implement machine learning and LLMs throughout the pipeline.
So when we think of like these data pipeline sort of products, we usually think of Cribble, right? So, which isn't a security first company, but this is the 800-pound gorilla in the market. So I guess what you're saying is it's a bit like that, but instead of it just being in and out, there's something in the middle there that enables you to actually do useful things with the data flowing through the data pipeline product.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So we've gone head to head with Cribble. We've displaced Cribble. And I think the number one thing is time to value. So within 7 days of deploying our product, we'll get you to onboarded and filtered with legitimate cost savings. And when you compare that to Cribble, it typically takes 2 to 4 months to get the product stood up, and it requires professional services. And I think one of the things that has continually come up in the market is the data footprint for an organization is not static. So anytime you change endpoint vendors, you change firewall vendors, you then either need to have the ability to manually use Cribble and change the configurations, or you need to pay more for professional services. And so I think security is super educated to the point where they just don't want to be reliant on anyone else to achieve their outcomes. And so we truly enable security practitioners to use a security-enabled pipeline and migrate away from a legacy pipeline like Cribble. If you take one of our public case studies, Venture Employer Solutions, which is a 10,000 person benefits payroll provider, they have, I believe it's 20 to 25 data sources. But the reality is 90% of the logs going to their SIM are from network, endpoint, and firewall. And so when you actually look at the problem and you realize it's concentrated within those three data sources, having a solution that can very quickly onboard analyze and not just recommend filtering rules based on generic data source recommendations, but specific custom created filtering rules using machine learning and LLMs to filter their data as opposed to just a general pack that focuses on just that broad vendor. We were able to reduce 83% of their firewall logs within 7 days, saving them $250,000 annually.
So I guess the idea here is instead of just watching the output as it filters into your seam and saying, well, we want to pull that back and sort of trying to adjust the input, you can kind of do this in a more, do it at the point where it's in transit.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So also joining us is Colin Germain, who runs data science with Realm. So Colin, what's the magic here? Like, tell us how work.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think, as Pete mentioned, it's really all about scale. How do we deal with the large volume of security data and find, the right pieces for, volume reduction? What can go to your archive but doesn't necessarily need to go to your SIEM? That's kind of the core question that we're solving and providing value out of the box with. And so in terms of, how does it work under the hood, right? It starts really with online statistical learning techniques that allow us to really understand the composition of the data, what's in there, and what are the opportunities for impactful volume reduction. On top of that, we use Gen AI systems that are able to actually reason about the meaning of the fields, the information, and the filtering rules that we can apply. So being able to speed up that process. But as a company, ultimately, we want to give the best recommendations, and we do also use human in the loop expertise to review those final recommendations to make sure that they're really sort of hitting the mark in terms of reducing the volume.
You've just said something that
detections.
Every single company that's using Gen AI to do this sort of thing has said to me, which is it gets you 90% of the way there, right? And then that last 10%, it's a human who's always got to take a couple of dumb things the LLM has generated and fix them.
I think, part of it is, our mission is to give control to, those SOC teams and be able to have them, make the decision. And it's really important to be able to, as you're building these AI systems, think about where does the human need to come in and really be that oversight. And I think that, the thing is, this is instead of a professional services contract, something that can be very expensive and take a very long time to do. So we're able to accelerate this process quite significantly with still that oversight and still the expertise to make sure that it's really kind of the best result.
So, I mean, like when we thought about bringing a solution to market and ultimately putting in checks and balances to make sure customers can be comfortable, we really thought about it as the dev test run methodology. And so when you think about having a human in the loop, it's not necessarily a human needing to analyze into free form thought into a solution. It's a human in the loop to make sure no errors have occurred and that they are fully conscious of what it is that we're doing. So there really isn't any creation of a solution. It's more of a check the box and make sure you're aware of what it is that we've prescribed to them.
It's like a code review. I think that's the way that I always think about it. It's being able to come back and make sure the quality is there. You've got all those automated tests. You've got CI/CD. And it's kind of coming back with that.
Now we were talking before we got recording, Pete, about this changes to the SIEM market, right, or changes to SIEM methodology. And it gets interesting because you just mentioned, okay, you can cut back the amount of firewall logs you're sending to your SIEM. There's an entire industry around trying to minimize Splunk costs, right? And this product certainly fits into all of that. But you also said, okay, you're going to direct some of the most critical logs into your SIEM. You're going to dump some into the archive. The question becomes, like, once you've got a structured, decently structured store of this sort of information, and you can query it, why do you need the SIEM anymore, right? And I understand that people are very welded to their SIEMs, but we've seen all of these interesting products pop up over the years. I'm thinking of products like Panther, which, again, people are using to tune, detection as code and tune stuff that can go into their SIEM. But even with them, I'm like, well, why do you need the SIEM? If you can dump all of this stuff into Snowflake and query it, why do you actually need Splunk? I'm guessing that you're thinking along similar lines with something like this, which is, hey, you can use it to tune stuff going into your SIEM, but it's also an excellent way to get a lot of this data into a structured archive that then you can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think like most of your listeners are very technical, right? And so this might be something everybody's well aware of, but we're all realizing the cost of data, right? And like the cost of data is not going away. It's only going to increase. And so even if your end goal is to dump everything in Snowflake and run, detection as code on top of that, no matter what, everyone's going to need to be thoughtful on what data they're sending to what destination. And so having a pipeline that helps you right size the data and only send what's needed, both from a cost perspective, but also from a noise and eliminating false positives is critical. But to the bigger point you're making, I think we've all taken for granted that SIM and detection requires storage to be combined with analysis. And that to your point, like that's not the case anymore. And there's so many different places you can dump data. But as you think about Realm and our mission, like our mission is to help customers ultimately alleviate themselves from unneeded cost in the SIM and unneeded risks resulting from their data that's flowing to the SIM. But as the security market evolves, we see a much bigger opportunity for customers to have somebody as their true data broker, which will enable them to more safely and easily adopt the agentic solutions that could potentially end up, taking over the SIM market.
So I guess that would mean what various model context protocol servers being able to query your data store. Sort of is that kind of what we're thinking?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, Colin, we've been talking a bunch about this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think part of it is also structuring the data through normalization. We look at things like OCSF mapping, being able to bring the data into a structure that is easy to see across many different sources. But from the AI perspective, yeah, it's thinking about model context protocol servers being able to make this more accessible to agents in other systems and thinking about those interactions.
Yeah, right. So when we think about I've got to ask, right? Because you're out there, you're rolling this product out into some big enterprises. Like, what's the low hanging fruit of stuff that you can just yeet from the seam? Like, what is the stuff like? Even if someone weren't to go and become a customer of yours, right? If you had to tell them to eliminate one particular type of like log source or one particular type of event that's very voluminous, what would it be?
I mean, I'd say at a high level, it falls into three categories: endpoint, network, and firewall. I mean, as far as the individual events and things we'd remove, Colin, what would you say? I mean, we've done a bunch of work on across those three
I mean,
pillars.
I have one, but I'm curious if Patrick, if you have a guess. Um, I'm curious if you have a guess to which one it would be.
I've got no idea, man. That's why I'm asking. I'm genuinely because there's so much
Okay.
waste, right? Like there's so many dumb events, so many like things
Yeah.
that just aren't even useful for context, and I'm just like, where would you even start? But I'm thinking there's got to be like a top three, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely those, process in time, normal event type things or heartbeats that are, clear, non-security relevant information. But then there's also areas of, data that is useful for security information, but isn't necessarily something that needs to be applied for your particular detection suite. So one of the areas we found actually is DNS traffic for specific domains that are known is actually a very large chunk of volume typically, and so DNS, no
Yeah,
surprise. I mean, it's a
a
pretty big
user looked up
protocol.
google.com kind of thing.
So broader set of that and personalized to the customer in addition. So I think we've seen a lot of out of the box value for that.
All right, we're going to wrap it up. Pete, any final words?
Uh, I mean, I think like the general thesis based on what we're doing and what we would love to share with your customers is the activities that they deal with on a regular basis that revolve around resolving challenges with data ingestion, data delivery. Like they don't need to be challenges. And everybody talks about AI and everybody likes to think about all the different things AI can do. And I think the number one thing that we've all realized is it can remove manual activities. And it can remove a lot of the like painstaking things that aren't advancing anyone's understanding or advancing security programs. And so that's what we do. We basically get rid of all the nitty gritty blocking and tackling of running logging pipelines, and we use the latest and greatest technology to do it. Um, I think the other thing I'd say is we are running a risky business promotion. And so what I'd say is if there's any one of your listeners that are struggling with data volume or SIM costs, we'd love to talk to you. And if within 10 days of using our product, we're not able to reduce your firewall, endpoint, or network traffic by 50%, we'll give you the product for free for 6 months. And so we would love the opportunity to earn the right to keep that promise, if we have the opportunity to do so.
All right, Colin Germain, Pete Martin, thank you so much for joining us on the Risky Biz Snake Oilers showcase. It's great to chat to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here. Appreciate the time.
That was Pete Martin and Colin Germain there from Realm Security. Big thanks to them for that. It is time for our next snake oiler now, and we are chatting with Snehal Antani, who is the CEO of Horizon3, which is a an AI pen testing platform. Now, I find this stuff really interesting, right? Because throughout my career, I've known so many pen testers and just extremely skilled pen testers. And I think it's going to be very difficult to automate away a lot of the skills that they have that make them good testers. Now, that said, the testers that I've known through my career are not really representative of the typical industry pen tester, right? So there's a lot of by the numbers kind of pen testing out there. And I think AI is going to be massively, massively disruptive to that sort of stuff. And given that it's automated, I also think it's going to be quite disruptive to the vulnerability scanning and attack surface measurement platforms, right? So I think a few things are sort of converging on one here, and it's probably going to put us in a better place, if I'm honest. So Snehal joined me for this interview where he gets to pitch Horizon3, and here's what he said Horizon3 does.
We pioneered the whole concept of AI hackers, or this idea of autonomous pen testing. And the idea there is, with no knowledge of the environment, how can we point, click, shoot, hack, and prove what's exploitable, exactly how to fix it, and then enable you to run a retest to verify that you're good to go. The bulk of my users aren't pen testers, actually. They're IT admins and network engineers that just want to go home early, and they want to make sure they're fixing problems that are exploitable, that lead to consequence, and they know exactly how to retest and verify that they've actually solved it.
So we should really define what you mean in terms of scope when you talk about automated pen testing, right? Because we've seen this before. We've seen vulnerability scanning companies saying they were automating pen tests 15 years ago. Is this just a better vuln scan? What's the difference?
It's a fantastic question. I just did a LinkedIn post today on this. So I did a LinkedIn post on how our AI hacker Node Zero, after initial compromise and initial access, was able to exploit HPILO, chain a bunch of issues together, defeat an EDR, and then use that to pull the auth token from Microsoft Outlook and get global Entra admin rights. So if you think about that as the attack path, chaining multiple issues across multiple machines, the goal of the pen test is to show you the impact. A vuln scanner will tell you that HPILO is a problem. It won't show you the consequence of what the attacker can do if they abuse ILO to achieve an objective. So the pen test is about showing consequence. And the next part is the goal of the pen test isn't to find problems, it's to quickly fix problems that matter. And so when you think about pen test helps show consequence, consequence is how you prioritize, and then you're able to fix issues that are actually going to put you in the news. I'll end with, when I think about vulnerability scanners, and I was the CIO at GE Capital. I spent time as a CTO within DoD. I was the largest vuln scanning customer in the world for several of the major vendors. And the hardest part of my job was deciding what not to fix, because I would get a list of vulnerabilities from these scanners, apply a bunch of math, and make those lists slightly less crappy. And because they're full of noise, they weren't sure that they were exploitable. Maybe I had compensating controls in place. So being vulnerable doesn't mean you're exploitable. And that's why understanding if you're exploitable and the consequence of exploitability is super important in prioritization.
Sure, but I just asked you why you're different to a vulnerability scanner, and then you just described how it's a better vulnerability scanner. Well, no, because it shows you consequence, right?
Yeah, so the most specific part is this. A vuln scanner does scatter gather. It can assess potential vulnerabilities on a single machine. What it cannot do is chain together a variety of issues across machines. So that's number one. It's about lateral movement. It's about chaining multiple issues, CVEs, misconfigurations, harvested credentials, and other techniques that lead to an impact, whether it's domain admin, sensitive data exposure, and so on. And so when you think about the fundamental difference, a potential issue on one host is not telling you much. Understanding how issues can be chained together across hosts that lead to impact is the really important part of the insight for how you're exploitable.
I mean, what I'm hearing here is maybe pen testers were just better vuln scanners all along.
Yeah, or
maybe that's the lesson.
Here's another question. What's a vulnerability? Is by nature, we assume a vulnerability is a CVE. But it's actually not accurate, right? A vulnerability can be a variety of things that can be abused for that leads to some sort of consequence.
Yeah, a misconfiguration is not a CVE, right? Like I totally get what you're saying there. Why don't you talk us through the sorts of things that your platform actually finds, right? Like, so you spoke about one particularly cool case, right? Where it went from here, went from there, grabbed a token, did this, got global rights. But what does a typical exercise look like? How is it deployed? Is this a continuous process? Is this a point, click, go, one-time thing? Just walk us through a little bit more how this stuff is used.
Yeah, excellent. So let's first talk through the process of actually running a pen test. So break pen tests up into either breaking in from the outside or assuming breach and assuming initial access. And what is the blast radius from that initial access point?
So you can start with a zero access, or you can give this AI agent a shell on a box and say, go from there.
That's exactly right. At the end of the day, good organizations assume the attacker is going to get in because there's so many doors and windows, whether it's rarely a 0-day in your custom web app, more likely it's a syskev on an edge gateway or a misconfigured Jenkins server that's exposed to the web, or they purchase access off the dark web or so on. They're going to get in. So every cyber attack really starts with shell on a single host. So if you want to run an internal pen test, you can come through our portal, configure the scope, which is basically what IP range should we operate within? What IP ranges should we not touch? Do you want us to be aggressive or gentle? Go. And then there's more advanced options like, would you like us to auto deploy honey tokens along the way, which has never been done before? Think of that as, while breaking into your house, I'll install Ring cameras along the way. So we'll auto deploy fake AWS credentials, fake Azure tokens, fake SQL dump files during the pen test. So that becomes part of the scope of the configuration. You hit go, it'll generate a curl command. That's a single-use Docker container that gets downloaded. That Docker container gets initiated on whatever initial access point you want in your network. Assume breach from the DMZ, spin up that curl command on the DMZ. Assume breach from your customer support network, assume breach, spin up the container there. That container will connect to our brains in the cloud, which is a dedicated virtual private cloud session just for that pen test. It starts to instruct the Docker container what to do. Conduct recon enumeration first, which is pretty common. After that, it's next best actions based on what's been discovered. Should I go after the router, the printer, or the television next? That depends on discovered services, historical record of success, likelihood of achieving the objective of domain admin or sensitive data exposure. And it continues to iterate through this next best action process until it's exhaustively and comprehensively tested your environment. And at the end, the Docker container shuts down and you can delete it. The VPC shuts down and gets completely destroyed. So you have no persistent footprint that you've got to go off and install and manage. It's truly point, click, shoot.
Yeah. Okay. So this is you run it like a pen test exercise. This isn't like a continuous scanning model, for example.
Now, the next part is you can run it ad hoc. Like, I just want to run a pen test right now. As customers, see, the problem in pen testing is the absorptive capacity for fixing stuff. So if you run a pen test all the time, that's great. But if you don't have the capacity to actually fix the issues, you're not making yourself any better. So as customers improve their absorptive capacity to fix, they start running more frequently. So they shift from 1 or 2 pen tests a year to 40 or 50 pen tests a month, assuming breach from different points of view, constantly finding, fixing, and verifying. So for our more advanced customers, at any given moment, there's at least 1 or 2 pen tests running assessing different parts of the environment. And that's because they've become really good at quickly remediating or mitigating the findings from these pen tests.
I mean, I don't know. You're very optimistic about the ability of customers to remediate, right? Like, I've spent my entire career surrounded by black-pilled pen testers who just dump horrifying reports onto CISOs' desks over and over and over. And quite often they will do 2 reports a year apart looking at the same slice of a network or the same application. It'll have the same findings in it a year later. So where are you finding all of these customers who just can't wait to fix what these reports are surfacing?
So
it's amazing. It must be amazing to be you.
Yeah. So, I mean, think about the company. We are the fastest growing cybersecurity company in the industry. According to Inc. magazine, we just got audited for that recognition. I have 4,300 companies globally using me. And we're doubling to tripling our customer count every year as a result. There's a massive market, but there's very different types of customers. So you've got the really large Fortune 500 types. And the simple sales qualification question is, with an unlimited budget, how many pen tests would you run a year? 1 to 2, you're compliance focused. Cool, nothing wrong with that. 4 or more, that's my sweet spot. And mostly they got to run 4 or more because of PCI, DORA, GDPR, NIS2. There's some reason compliance-wise, but they also want to be resilient. So the big companies use us in that way. MSSPs are actually my fastest growing segment. And so 80% of those 4,300 companies are fully serviced by MSSPs that white label or OEM us, and they bundle us into their MDR offering, their SOC as a service offering, as a way to audit and improve their security controls and build their IR muscle memory.
Yeah, and I guess for them, anything that results out of these things, that's more billable hours for them too, I'd imagine, right? So it's
they tend to also bundle remediation services with the findings, because once again, especially in the long tail, the mid-market and beyond, and at Black Hat, I keynoted this topic with Bailey Bickley from NSA Cyber Collaboration Center. The mid-market and the long tail, whether it's in the defense industrial base or advanced manufacturing or most businesses in the world, they just want to build antennas or build welding or whatever their big core business is. They don't have the capacity to fix. So MSSPs end up bundling remediation services with our pen test findings.
Yeah. Okay. So I got a couple more questions here. One is, you've spoken about the network-based side of like pen testing and whatnot. Are you doing much around identity as well? Because it seems like identity attacks these days, you don't even need to get shell, right? Yeah. You just get the right identity, you buy it, off you go. You can pivot all your way to great victory. Are you doing much around that?
Yeah. In fact, our probably core expertise is credential-based attacks. Attackers don't have to hack in with 0 days. They log in with credentials that they found. I think we all know that as practitioners. So that's one thing that we're really, really focused on and really good at. The multitude of ways to pilfer credentials, and then the way to abuse those credentials across an organization that's both efficient and production safe. I can't just arbitrarily spray and pray. I'll lock out accounts and take production systems down. So for me to be able to be really good at credential attacks against production systems, not only do I have to understand the credentials I found, I've got to understand and be smart about what systems they likely have access to. I've got to introspect your credential lockout policies, whether it's local or global, and all the nuances around that. And I've got to use that to be thoughtful in how I'm going to abuse credentials across the environment.
Okay, now my last question is, where does it make sense not to do this? Where does it make sense to stick with human brains when it comes to pen testing? Because there is a great temptation among people such as yourself to say, we've completely revolutionized the pen test market. You don't need humans anymore. I personally don't believe that's true, which also does not mean that I don't see the value in what you're doing. Yeah. I guess I'm just asking, like, as the science is now, where is that line?
I agree with you, actually. So there are 2 areas that are uniquely human. The first area is finding logic flaws in custom code. That is especially in bespoke systems, that is uniquely human. And that area of pen testing, I think, is going to be uniquely human for quite a while. The other area that's uniquely human are the long tail bespoke OT ICS systems. I can't guarantee production safety of a nuclear power plant because I don't have one. I can't own one. I can't buy one. I can't verify production safety against that. And so I think the long tail of OT-ICS will be uniquely human for a very long time. However, I think that hybrid cloud infrastructure, assuming, starting external, gaining initial access internal, pivoting to the cloud, compromising auth tokens, dumping data from Slack. That area is primarily a graph analytics problem that is uniquely machine centric, and algorithms are far superior at testing at scale than humans are. But algorithms generally suck at finding logic flaws in custom code, and are incredibly difficult to do long tail exploitation of bespoke OTICS systems.
What about identifying previously unknown misconfigurations, things like that? I mean, because they're essentially logic bugs as well.
Yeah, I view that as logic flaws, right, to some degree.
Yeah.
And I think humans are going to be uniquely gifted there. To be honest with you, right? So NCC is a customer of ours. I did an interview podcast with them. Their guys focus on things that'll put them on stage at DEF CON. That's uniquely human. Mastering the art of recon enumeration, dancing on domain controllers, pilfering credentials, and all that stuff, machines are better at that today. Let the humans focus on the really bespoke things that are DEF CON stage worthy.
All right, Snehal Antani, thank you so much for joining me to pitch this stuff. I mean, as someone who's been in the industry for a long time, I do find this fascinating. Yeah, thanks for joining us.
No, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
That was Snehal Antani there from Horizon3. Big thanks to him for that. And I really enjoyed that interview because I got to push him a little bit there, and he gave great answers. So who knows where all of this goes. Okay, time for our third and final snake oiler today, and we're chatting with Persona, and indeed Dimitri Greco from Persona, all about their platform. Now, their platform is all about identifying people remotely, right? And they do this usually through some sort of live camera capture of a person's ID and of their face. Now, these sorts of identity proving platforms have been useful for regulated industries historically. And then, any sort of business where they have to prove to a reasonable degree that someone is who they say they are, whether that's a, Uber Eats delivery driver. I don't know if Uber's a customer, but whether it's a delivery driver or, a banking customer, whatever, it's that sort of thing. But what's interesting lately is that there are enterprise use cases for this sort of stuff now, right? There's people getting socially engineered by Scattered Spider, doing better identity checks using a technology like this, when someone's ringing into the call center might be helpful, for example. And then there's the threat of North Korean IT workers infiltrating Western organizations. As you'll hear, Dimitri says people are using this sort of stuff now to do spot checks on people's identities to make sure that the person who did the interview and did the job and did the first week's work is still around and still actually the person doing the job. So I started off here by asking Dimitri to actually describe the user experience when someone's being prompted for an ID challenge by the Persona platform. Here's what he had to say. Enjoy.
Yeah, so the typical the UX is typically you are going to provide a live capture of your government ID. You are going to move on to a live capture of a selfie verification. We run biometric comparisons. We run liveness checks to ensure you're not injecting a deep fake. You haven't pre-recorded a video. And then you pass sort of the ultimate test of, are you actually a human in front of that camera? Are you not sort of a bad actor who's, pre-recorded something?
You send the user an electric shock through the handset and gauge their reaction and see if it's real, if the reaction time's correct, right? But okay, so here's the thing, right? That's always going to be an arms race, isn't it? When you're doing these sorts of tests. I've had identity verification, apps doing identity verification flash a whole bunch of colors at me, for example, so that it can make sure that those colors are bouncing back off my face. And, but all of these things are going to be tricks that attackers are going to be trying to reverse engineer to try to fool. I mean, is that the experience for you guys, like on your end? Do you see people trying to do this yet? Or do they just move on to easier targets once they realize that someone's actually trying to do proper ID verification?
Yeah, we see incredible sophisticated fraud attempts, and a lot of the times we're not ignorant to the fact that it is an arms race. So we take the approach to layer on different signals, right? Instead of just relying on, does this face look legitimate? We are collecting other signals. What is the device? What's the frame rates of the camera? What's the label of the camera? Are they on VPNs? Are they on Tor? Have we seen session information from this, browser before? We look at velocity attacks. So how often have we seen a selfie like this being submitted to sort of the Persona ecosystem? And then we look at other things like similar backgrounds. You might have the best deep fake in the world, but if you rotate through 10 faces with the exact same background, we can start to detect other signals that way. So we are relying so-called on passive signals just as much as we are on, active details that, an individual is providing.
Yeah, so I guess it's like a classic case of like risk scoring, right? With all of these different signals and like face matches, but background weird, that might be one score. And then, they're coming from a Tor exit node, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. And we've seen interesting things where, I almost call this like the delivery use case where there's tons of photos of individuals in a car that look like they're taking a selfie about to like work for Uber Eats or Deliveroo or something. And the actual device that is taking that photo is a desktop, right? It's a laptop. But who is actually ever taking a selfie with a laptop in their car? Those things just don't add up. So those are things that we see. We clear giveaways that it's video injected deepfake.
So, what sort of customers do you have, right? Because you can, you could use this any way you want, right? It can be an SDK. It can be like you can pop out, have a pop-up from a website or whatever to do it. Like there's multiple different ways to use this technology. So what are the sectors that are really using this and what are they using it for? I mean, you mentioned to me earlier that, I guess this North Korea stuff, right? Like for HR verification, it's kind of turning into a useful case there. But I'm guessing also people offering financial services and, all sorts, right? But why don't you just walk us through where what the key verticals are for you there?
Yeah, and honestly, we are industry agnostic. When I first came into this, we were obviously the origins of identity verification are regulated industries. So financial services, you're signing up, you're verifying individuals to open bank accounts, and sort of fintech led that drive. Now we are seeing, trust and safety across marketplaces. You go to Airbnb, you want to validate that, the host who's hosting you is, safe, and the person who's staying in your house is also safe. Dating applications are also popular, right? Verifying that you're not getting catfished. It's the exact person you're hoping to meet. And then on the workforce side, it's like we are making sure that it's not an identity mule. So a North Korean, ring hasn't paid some inconspicuous individual to go through an application for you. So validating individuals when they onboard. So just last year, we had a large announcement with Okta. So they use us, Persona, internally to validate all of their hires day one and continuously monitor those individuals as they go through password resets and authenticator resets and all that.
It's funny, right? I had someone on the show recently from Okta actually talking about how they will have, they get one guy to do the interview and then it's someone completely different who turns up to the job, right? So how does that continuous monitoring piece plug into it? Like, is the user prompted to go through the verification again? Because I can imagine they could just pass it back off to the guy who did the interview. Or is it something where there is, endpoint software on the company issued laptop that occasionally takes a photo? Or how does that work?
Yeah, so it is the idea of like sort of what we consider re-verification. So at a later point in time, you do verify and it will verify you against the original selfie. To your case, yes, you could potentially find that individual who did take the selfie for you. Other times people are using identity mules. They'll pay someone $10 on a dark web to go through a verification service for them. That person's gone. It's hard to get in contact back with that same exact person. So
they're doing something else. They're on vacation, whatever, right? Like, I get it.
Exactly. And we see that a lot with like our gig economy workers. So you sign up for an account, say on DoorDash, you're re-verified before you start your shift. That's from a legal perspective and so also from a safety perspective, making sure the right person's actually delivering your food, picking you up, and it's not like, say, a family member or a friend, whose account you're sharing.
I mean, it's a story as old as time. I remember in Melbourne, back when we used to take taxis and not ride shares, there would be the picture of the driver in a laminated thing on the dashboard, right? And I'm telling you, they would more often not match the guy sitting next to you.
Yeah.
And I say sitting next to you because in Australia we actually sit in the front seat of taxis, but that's a whole other topic. So I guess I was querying you before about the arms race in terms of people being able to fool this system, but there is the opposite problem, right? Which is that, say I am a legitimate identity trying to verify myself for some important service. And Persona says, no, this is a dodgy identity. How do you tackle the false positive problem? Because I imagine that is almost quite often with detection, just generally, whether it's threats or bad identities, quite often the problem is not the false negative problem, it is the false positive problem. So, I mean, is that where you spend a lot of your efforts?
Yeah, so I mean, we will always, the way we've designed our platform is we do provide feedback in the event of quality issues. So if someone is going through a submission and there's glare, there's blur, there's like a specific parameter you're looking for, like a date of birth or a last name that's not available on the ID for whatever reason, like we will always try to allow the user to retry and get through a process. Our platform is extremely customizable. So some customers we work with don't offer retries, some offer more than others. And things for like fraud related false positives, it's a little bit more difficult because we obviously don't relay back to the user, hey, this ID looks fraudulent. It's more obfuscated. And typically, at some points in time, especially on like the workforce side, there'll always be some component of manual review. The idea is that a lot of the verifications that are happening right now, it's like 90% of that is all manual review. So if we can cut that down drastically, it's saving people time.
Can you think of a time where you've had to change something rapidly in response to something a threat actor is doing?
Yes, so we have this. It's funny because it's sort of a lore inside Persona, but there was one customer we were working with, and we can start to evaluate in an anonymized fashion, like, are there threat actors going across our ecosystem? So they're trying to attack one Persona customer and go across another Persona customer, and there was this guy called the Couch Guy, and he basically had a couch in the background and would rotate through numerous different deepfakes. So his couch, his shirt, everything was identical, but his faces were, to the naked eye, it was very, very difficult to tell that it wasn't a legitimate person. And that started our background similarity detection. So we realized actually, instead of looking at the face, let's look at everything else. And in a velocity, environment, can we detect if a similar background is being submitted, 50, 60 times in a single environment? And that was sort of the formation of a similar background detection. But Couch Guy will live on in Persona.
Yeah, right. Couch Guy is law. I guess, too, an interesting thought that I had when you're talking about this, where you are essentially showing your government ID to a camera, then you're showing the face that is on the government ID to a camera. I mean, at that point, the computer, the camera, is just a proxy for someone who's at a physical presence at a like a bank branch or whatever. And you can always show someone at a bank branch a fake ID as well. So it's sort of, I guess, just, I guess the problem you're solving or attempting to solve is to get that proximity. It's like a physical equivalence to physical proximity to someone who may or may not be who they say they are.
I will also challenge you in the fact that although it is a proxy for someone who can visually check it, it's very hard for someone in real time to compute connected similarities. So if I submit a driver's license to Persona and I'm on a specific device and that device is...
Yeah. No, I get the person at the bank branch isn't going to realize that 50 people have submitted IDs of a man wearing the exact same tie in the last 10 seconds.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned rideshare, you mentioned that, financial institutions and whatever can do this for their customers. You also mentioned the tie-in with Okta and this whole enterprise use case. Is the enterprise use case for this kind of the new one? Or has, for workforce verification, is that like the new thing? Because when I think of services like yours, right, it's very much like the bank wants to verify a customer sort of thing, or, there was the IRS with the whole ADME thing a couple of years ago, right? Like that's what most people think of. But now with these North Koreans doing what they do, I would think that the enterprise thing is a whole new practice for you, right?
Yeah, for identity verification, workforce verification is very nascent, I would say, within the last 12 to 18 months. It's becoming more recent, and that's off of sort of the tailwinds of like COVID, where remote work was flourishing and people would sign up and go to a company and get recruited fully remote, and you'd meet your hiring manager during the process and maybe again virtually. So that's opened a lot of threat vectors. And even just with remote first or remote flexible companies, the idea of people getting locked out of their accounts, it opens up a whole vector for like social engineering. that's how most of these hackers are actually getting in. If you talk about the young hackers like Scattered Spider that took over MGM and Caesars and Visa and Marks and Spencers, it's like most of the time, they're just calling and sort of finessing their way in. They're not doing any sort of like hacking to really get in.
All right, Dimitri Greco, thank you so much for joining us to have a chat about Persona. I think it's a real interesting cat and mouse, like arms race kind of gig you got there, guy. Fascinating to talk to you about it. Thanks a lot.
I appreciate it, Patrick. Thank you.
That was Dimitri Greco there from Persona. Big thanks to him for that. And that actually concludes this edition of the Snake Oilers podcast. There are links to all of the vendors in the show notes for this podcast, in the post for this podcast. I do hope you enjoyed all that. I'll be back soon with more security news and analysis. But until then, I've been Patrick Gray. Thanks for listening.